Chapter 11. A Tantalizing Gift. As the sounds of the scream faded, the watchers outside the house dashed in, some through the kitchen door, others through a side door to the sunroom. All ran to the front hall. "Who was it?" Bess cried out. "And where is she?" "We don't know, but everybody look for her," Nancy ordered. Part of the group bounded up the front stairway, while Kiabu and Emma took the rear one. Nancy, Ned, George, and Bert searched the rooms on the first floor. They looked in closets, behind curtains and screens, and even underneath pieces of furniture, but there was no sign of the woman in the white muumuu. Disappointed, the whole group of searchers met once more in the front hall. "How could that woman have escaped from the house?" Bess asked, puzzled. "We were watching every window and door." "Up to a point we were," Nancy replied. "But when the woman screamed, everyone who was outside came running in. It's my guess she grasped the opportunity to go out of a window at that time." "You mean," George spoke up, "that she screamed on purpose to lure us inside so that she could get away?" "Possibly," Nancy answered. "But also, she may have been injured or frightened. I'm going to get my magnifying glass and see if I can find any clues." She hurried upstairs and from one of her suitcases took the magnifying glass, which her father had given her for Christmas. It was a very fine one, and Nancy called it her pride and joy. When Nancy came downstairs again, Kiabu followed her from place to place, his eyes lighting up with amazement as she made such amusing but accurate remarks as, "Kiabu, you really should ask Bess not to lean her elbows on the piano. It makes marks. And Dave, when you dance, better not wear that tan sweater. It sheds." Nancy's friends laughed and explained to Kiabu that the young sleuth probably could have deduced this in the pitch dark. The caretaker shook his head in astonishment and remained silent, but he continued to follow Nancy around. In the sunroom, she stopped in front of a statue of a Japanese warrior. The figure was holding a samurai sword, poised for action. Nancy examined the weapon carefully with her magnifying glass. Then she smiled. "I believe the lady in the white muumuu screamed because she grazed her head or arm on this sword." "You mean there's blood on it?" Bess asked, horrified. "No, but there are tiny bits of human flesh and hair." Bess shivered as Ned stepped to the window near the statue. "And she probably went out here." He surveyed the flat lava rock below. Nancy nodded. The low open window was well hidden by bushes, and the searchers were now convinced that the woman had escaped from the house this way. Since there were no fingerprints on the windowsill, Nancy concluded that the woman had sat on it, whirled, and jumped down. Nancy climbed out of the window, and Ned followed. With her magnifying glass, she examined the rocks carefully, but could find no footprints. In the soft earth between a row of bushes, however, were small, light footprints. "The woman doesn't weigh much," said Ned. "Right?" "Right," Nancy agreed. "And she runs gracefully. She's probably a dancer. But all this doesn't help identify her. Is she the wife of one of the double scorps? Or is she some other intruder mixed up with the mystery of Kaluakua?" Directly after luncheon, Kiabu announced 2 callers from Honolulu. One was a police detective, Sergeant Hawk, and the other an executor from the bank which was handling old Mr. Sakamaki's estate. He introduced himself as Henry Dutton. The men addressed most of their remarks to Nancy. Sergeant Hawk spoke first. "Police Captain McGinnis of River Heights phoned Honolulu headquarters. He said your father had been in touch with him and suggested that someone from our department come to see you, Miss Drew. I understand that you have up-to-the-minute information on Mr. Sakamaki's case and that certain suspicious things have happened since you became interested in Kaluakua." Nancy gave a full account of all she knew in connection with the mystery, including the episode of the strange woman in the white muumuu. The detective, meanwhile, was busy making notes in a small book. From time to time, he asked questions. Finally, he put away his pencil and smiled at Nancy. "This is a very fine, full report. The Honolulu police will start at once to locate the man who uses the names Jim O'Keefe and Tim O'Malley. From your description, we should have no trouble locating him. Also, we shall try to find Ralph Emler. As to the woman wearing the white muumuu, it's my deduction that she does not wear this except on occasions such as this morning, so it will be more difficult to locate her. Now I would like to examine the statue on which she scratched herself and also the footprints outside." Ned offered to take the detective to the 2 spots so that Nancy might talk further with Mr. Dutton. "Would you mind telling me something about the claimants to the Sakamaki estate?" Nancy asked the banker. "I'll be very happy to," Mr. Dutton replied. "In fact, after I was informed by the police about your prowess as a detective, Miss Drew, I decided to tell you everything and ask your assistance." Nancy blushed a little. "Oh, I fail sometimes," she said modestly, "but I'll do everything I can to be of help." Mr. Dutton told her that the 2 mysterious claimants to the Sakamaki fortune were very reticent. Roy Chatley and his sister Janet Lee had had little to say, apparently relying on the various papers they had with them to prove their case. "Do they have a lawyer?" Nancy asked. "Not yet," the executor replied. "But today they threatened to obtain one if we don't accept their credentials pretty soon." "There's doubt in your mind, then, about them?" inquired Nancy. "Naturally. I knew elderly Mr. Sakamaki well. It seems strange that he never mentioned the California relatives." Mr. Dutton paused for a moment, then said, "Since the estate is so large, it is certainly worth fighting for. So far, the credentials of these California people seem to be in order, but I understand your father, Miss Drew, is going to stop in California on his way here and check everything." Nancy asked if there were any letters from old Mr. Sakamaki to Janet and Roy, or their mother or grandmother, among the papers of proof. "No," Mr. Dutton answered. "The brother and sister claim to have read a news account of the will in a California paper." "Where are they staying?" Nancy inquired. The executor replied that they were visiting friends named Pond in Honolulu. "I can't remember the address exactly. I'll send it to you," he promised. By this time, the police detective had finished his work. He returned to the house, and a short while later, the 2 men were saying aloha to Nancy and her friends. Both insisted that Nancy get in touch with them at once if any trouble developed at Kaluakua. Just before a late dinner that evening, Kiabu came into the sunroom where the guests were seated. He presented Nancy with a long box, which evidently contained flowers. The caretaker waited as she opened it. Inside was a deep purple, almost black, sweet-smelling lei. "How very unusual," Nancy remarked, as she picked up the florist's envelope containing a card. Pulling it out, she read aloud, "From the Armstrongs." "Why, isn't that sweet of them?" she exclaimed. Nancy lifted the black lei from the box and started to put it round her neck. Seeing this, Kiabu snatched it from her hands. "Oh, please, no, do not wear the lei," he begged. This is a funeral offering." Nancy was mystified. Certainly the Armstrongs were familiar with the customs of the islands. Why would they send her such a lei? Rising from her chair, she went at once to the telephone and called Mrs. Armstrong. "A lei," the woman repeated after Nancy. "Mr. Armstrong and I did not send it to you." Nancy's heart skipped a beat, and she stood lost in thought. Was the lei a threat from some unknown person? End of chapter 11.